Today is May 10, Ukraine Media Center Ukraine Forum continues its operation. My name is Vasyl Samokhvalov and we start our next event. We will be talking about the land and the land market. Specifically, what it is look like during the war, how does it keep operating, and who are our guests today. First is Denis Bashlyk, Deputy Minister of Agrarian Policy and Food of Ukraine on digital transformations and digitalization. Sergii But, CEO at Prozorro.Sale. Oleksandr, Polishchuk, Deputy Head of the Department of Land Market and Evaluation of the State Service of Ukraine and Geodesy, Cartography and Cadastre, and Volodymyr, Vovkotrub, Director of the Department for the Use of Water Resources, Aquaculture and Scientific Support. So it's logical to give the word to the ministry. First of all, what is the land market as of today? Does it work, specifically during the war? Well, first of all, we have to understand what was the time when the land reform was adopted, how long has it taken. Well, it was more than a decade than the other countries had their land market. We were only hearing the myth about the land would be deported, exported, and our farmers would be left without nothing. So now the market is operating within 2 years. The electronic bids are on. Everything works. Everything seems to be all right, save for the case that there is a full-scale war going on in Ukraine. So we understand that Ukraine is in a unique situation when in the 21st year there is a new real estate market emerging, and then there's yet another stress factor, the full-scale invasion. What we see today is, just in brief, the summary for the first year. We had about 66,000 agreements entered into on lease or sale of the land plots that were under moratorium before, with a total area of 153,000 hectares within the first year only, when there was no full-scale invasion. During year 2022, the number of agreements was 53,000, around 53,000, and out of those 53,000, approximately 4 or 5 months, about half of the year, the registered were locked down in the regions of Ukraine, and the market was frozen. What we have today is, within the 4 months of 2023, I have this summary. We have 13,000 contracts for purchase and sale, and the average price has grown 20%, around 20%. And the demand was back in 2021, 2022, and the trend is preserved and is growing. So for me, it's one of the indicators that the majority, the vast majority, like 99% of the people, they believe in our victory, because they're not afraid not only to buy the land but also to invest in it. For example, as it's evidenced by the price analysis, we see that in Lviv region the average price for hectare is 162,000 hryvnias. In Kyiv region it's 148,000 hryvnias. For the moment of opening, those were absolutely different numbers. For example, it was 51,000 hryvnia in Lviv region and 48 in Kyiv region. And even having calculated with the factor of inflation, we see that even in conditional units that the growth is on. In the regions which are closer to the forward edge of the battle area, there is no such growth, but it's due to obvious reasons. And the inflation difference, it still exists. In Chernihiv region, the average price is 23,000 hryvnias per hectare, and before the war it was 16,000 hryvnias. So there is this inflation correction. I think that my colleagues may tell you in more detail about this, but I have to say that the reform is not yet over. It's still in progress. It's not an aim, but it's a path. It's a path to the to the completion of the land reform. Recently, the draft law 7632 was adopted. It's about to be signed by the president, and it improves the procedures for acquisition of the title to the land. For example, the married couple could not have more than 50 hectares because it was a deep estate property, or people could not buy their land plots more than 25.25 hectares. It resulted in some complicated procedures, but the market is developing, we're on the right path, and so let's not stop at that. So okay, let's follow this logic. We will talk to Prozorro about facts, figures and trends, then we'll talk to the Cadastre, and then we will proceed to such a delicate part as our fisheries. So what's interesting, we've heard the figures. They are not super big, but what do they evidence? What are the main trends? Good afternoon. Really, just as the previous speaker mentioned, it's been almost 2 years that the reform is going on, the land reform in our country. And the positive specific of this reform is the fact that all of the bids related to lease and sale of the land plots are fulfilled through electronic auctions. And talking about the scale in terms of proceeds, the system of Prozorro.Sale, it's about having public and private property generate proceeds and to be of use to the communities. So since the launch of the very first electronic auction in 2021, for the time being, more than 1.2 billion hryvnias were generated in a cash flow which resulted from the contracts. This is what the leasers and the sellers of the land plots got. The major part of those contracts are the communal property plots. So we have 1.2 billion of proceeds through the electronic auctions under the contracts related to lease and sale of the land. It's a good indicator in my opinion, and I agree with the previous speaker that this is only the beginning. The electronic auctions are a very good instrument that helps efficiently sell the land plots and the facilities and any real estate property, and it removes any additional questions why this or that item was sold to this buyer at that price. So the electronic bids procedure, it removes any questions about transparency and reasonability of the process. So we hope for the further activation of the auctions, and the Prozorro.Sale system is ready to comply with the requirements of the buyers, of the market, because it's our joint effort, our joint mission, our joint goal. And these auctions, they demonstrate very good statistics in terms of the number of participants, the bidders, and in terms of the growth of the initial value of the or initial price of the property. So in terms of the initial price, those land plots, they were below half of the billion before the auction was started. So we as the joint stock company, Prozorro.Sale, who is the administrator of the platform Prozorro.Sale, we are committed to continuing spreading awareness about the accessibility of the auctions, to make sure that the most participants possible know about them, which would allow us to get the highest price at the auction, and that would be the indicator of high proceeds for the budgets of different levels. Just a couple of words about how the battle operations impacted our operations, and we see really that the demand has not fallen substantially in both absolute numbers, in hryvnia equivalent, and neither it falls, fortunately, in terms of the interest of the bidders. And even during battle operations, as according to the statistics, we can observe a significant number of organizers. We observe competition. In average, it's about 3 buyers per bid. It's really quite a successful indicator, and the growth itself is also quite a positive tendency. What I would also like to mention is that besides the agrarian lands, the Prozorro.Sale also supports the sale of other types of land for development and construction. We have successful bids in that area, and apart from state and communal organizers, there is also opportunity for the private organizers to lease or sell their land plots. This is why the Prozorro.Sale platform allows selling broad range of types of property, and we hope that further on we will continue to make our significant contribution to the land reform in Ukraine. If I may ask for a couple of details, you mentioned that there are 3 bidders in average per bid. So generally, what is the tendency? How much land do the bidders buy? Hectares, hundreds of hectares, thousands of hectares? Who are the buyers? Are they the private buyers? Are they big corporations? Or are they the foreign buyers? So who buys it? Who buys the Ukrainian land? Well, those are Ukrainians. As I mentioned, there are land plots which are being bought for development and construction. We had a big auction for development in Lviv region, and in Chernivtsi also there are farmers who rent the land for the agrarian activities. Also, I want to say that the sale of agricultural land is currently restricted. It's the transitional state, and more than 100 hectares cannot be bought by one buyer. Plus, the foreigners cannot be participants of those. So for the time being, we may state that it's Ukrainians who either rent or buy the land plots, and every such auction, it has certain economic multiplier, because on the basis of that land plot, there is either agrarian activities going on, or just like in case of construction, there is a construction going on. So every such successful bid and signed agreement is the contribution to the bank of the GPD of Ukraine. Alright, then let's proceed to the land cadastre, which is alpha and omega of the land reform. So how is your cooperation with Prozorro? How transparent is your cooperation? And what are the main challenges you're facing? We understand that it's war. The register may have collapsed. We don't know what's going on in the temporarily occupied territories, what's going on there. So how does the cadastre work for the time being? Well, the state cadastre, regardless the events that were unfolding and that keep unfolding in Ukraine, the cadastre continues working for Ukrainians and for their benefit. Yes, during the first days of the full-scale invasion, there were certain lack of planning and confidence, but now that we can plan our lives more than one day ahead, the work is going on in some territories. For example, there is the restricted access to the or limited access to the state cadastre, but since there are no battle operations going on in those areas, the cadastre is operating. So how do we cooperate with Prozorro? When the electronic bits were implemented, it was a breakthrough, so to say, because before that the people had to, the bidders, there was their physical presence required. They had to submit the documents. For example, the plot which was sold in Lviv region, and the bidder from Kyiv had to come for some details, everything, and there should have been some amendments made to the documents. It all should have been done by hand, so to say. So the Prozorro.Sale, they created such a comprehensive tool that has all the information regarding the announced bids for the land sale or the rights to them. So the people, the potential sellers, they have access to the transparent platforms, which is built in a way that the announcement about one land plot is reflected in all the platforms. So all of the platforms are interested in have that property sold, having that property sold, and to get the most number of bidders involved. So the agricultural manufacturers, they can plan their activities, they can analyze the number of bidders, they can pick the land plot which they like the most by parameters, by starting conditions of sale, the area, the location. They can filter it, and upon the results they can plan their activities in terms of tax payments related to that property. So when there is some tendency related to lease, there is a tax payment emergent, and they can plan it, or in case of expansion of the area, they can plan it too. Yet another thing the cadastre is planning to cooperate cooperate with Prozorro in is the sale of the land plots to the territorial bodies or regional bodies of Cadastre. I'll explain it. The land market started working in year 21. However, it started working with certain substantial restrictions, with the limitation of area up to 100 hectares, then limitations for the foreign buyers and legal entities, and so on and so forth. So state cadastre or its regional bodies take all reasonable measures to apply to the court to confiscate the land plots in case a foreign entity, a foreign buyer acquires the title to the land, or the area was bigger than was above the requirement, so such property is confiscated and such land plot will be put to the bid again and sold to the entity which is capable of buying it after all the checks. So on whose balance, who is the owner, the temporary owner of those land plots? It will be land cadastre. Thank you. Okay, so let's proceed to you, Mr. Volodymyr. What's going on with in your area, with your area? I'm quite interested in fishing because my friends fishers, they say that the fisheries are all killed because there are the dams, no one was fishing anything, so everything is getting lost. Well, first of all, I want to thank you for invitation to such an event, because our agency today has taken a course for development, just like all of our state, and maybe the biggest number of reforms is going on in our sector, and all of them are aimed at improvement of water bioresources, on bringing this type of activity out of shadow, in which relation the first stage in this year was the adoption of the law on regulation of fisheries. It was signed by the president on the 21st of April this year, and the main, oh, I have slides there, the presentation is right there. The main areas of operation of that law is the public state, the transparency of its operation, the implementation of electronic management system for the fisheries, and all the adjacent subjects and the bodies and companies. They can create their personal accounts in this platform, and we will exchange information with all the interested sectors and entities who are present in the fishery market in Ukraine today. This law was aimed to mitigate such a shameful phenomena as fish poaching, and there was the electronic bid implemented in the area of fisheries too. So we started the reforms from two experimental resolutions, 1139, which envisages the title for lease of parts of the sea for the purposes of aquatic cultures. Unfortunately, this resolution does not work to the full extent, because part of the sea, due to the security situation, cannot be used for that particular purpose, and this is why our service today inventories the plots where such type of industry can be exercised. We coordinate those land plots currently with other entities, with other central bodies of executive power, and business will be presented those land plots later on, and they will be able to take part in the auction later and to get involved in this type of activity. On the 17th of June we will have a round table on that topic, and I invite everybody to get to participate in this round table. Another resolution was resolution 1479, which contemplated the sale of the title to use the water resources through the electronic auctions. And with the implementation of this resolution, starting from February, we started getting actively involved in implementation of these auctions, and we organized 523 such bids. we we took the payment for the special use of the water resources as an initial price for each plot, or each plot was otherwise split in a couple of subplots. And an interesting moment is that the implementation of this resolution allowed bringing new players to this market, because previously we had the committee created in Fisheries Agency that defined who can be admitted to this market. Now we advanced significantly in this area. We added 40% more bids than there were users before, and this is how we brought the new entities to the market, and it gave quite a good result, because the colleagues said that they had three bidders per bid, and in our case it's about nine bidders per bid. For example, in Kremenchuk water reservoir, where the initial price was 100,000 hryvnias per plot, it grew to 6.1 million. So until the 11th of June, there is the restriction for fishing in effect, and within that period we hold the auctions which were not sold before. So now we are about, since the restriction is in effect, the bidder, they should have some time to process their permits and so on and so forth. So the auctions are still going on in Kremenchuk water reservoir, and again, as I mentioned, some plots with the initial price of 100,000 hryvnias, they grew in price during the auction up to 5.6 and 6.1 millions. So the average price for 13 water plots, it was growing more than 3 times. And we have to review resolution 125, because we've seen what is the real price of fish that the entities are ready to pay for. For example, where there were bigger prices, for initial prices for the water plot, maybe there was more competition, but even the first contracts that we've closed, we take those figures for our analysis, and we will work to have those auctions operating on a continuous basis. We want to hold them at least once per 3 years, and we want to allocate new quota for the new players. But generally we want to have long-term contracts so that the entities can plan the renewal of their special water transport operation, for example, any other material resources, and involvement of more fishers, and that will result in wins in proceeds for the local budgets, because according to the resolutions the proceeds should go to the local budgets. We should be then channeled to the restoration of water resources. And our goal today is, in cooperation with the local authorities, local governments, well, we are in the middle of inspections now around the regions, because one of the goals of our work is the implementation of the fisher's ticket for the fishers, that they should pay for to use the water resources. For example, if an entity leases a water plot, more fishers come to them, they pay more money, and so on. So this is how it works. So we're not in square one. We have certain results which are optimistic for us, and which inspire us to move further on. So you want everything to look like in Europe, like not like you can go out with a fisher's stick and stay on the bank. Well, people have a right to fish using the fisher's stick, but what we're saying is that the Article 13 of Constitution that that the natural resources belong to the people of Ukraine. And our scientific institutions, they calculated the amount of water resources in Ukraine, and it was calculated that all the citizens of Ukraine can fish up to 3.6 kilograms of water of fish per day without any additional payment. So we had this question in the social media, and the majority of the fishers, they said that the price should be from 50 to 100 hryvnias. So from 5 up to 8 kilograms of fish, because 3 kilograms they come for free. And availing myself of this opportunity, I would like to wish every fisher to catch at least 8 kilograms of fish per day. The fishers will understand me that it's not so easy. Well, you mentioned the constitution, it has the regulations on the freedom of speech, so let's proceed to the floor. Anastasia Kravchenko, Ukrinform. I will have a couple of questions to maybe everybody. First question regarding the statistics of state and communal lands. Can you give us some figures during this period that the market is operated? Let's go question by question so it's easier to answer them. Well, look, as of the beginning, as of the moment that the auction started, the lease contracts amount to about the lease contracts were entered into for 2,500 plots of the which were in communal property and state property. Well, it was mostly communal property, in fact. One of the draft laws that were adopted in year 21, the so-called land reform package, it contemplated the handover of the land plots outside the cities from state property to communal property. Obviously there were different other types of land property left there, but as to the lease, the total number is 2,800. The sale of the land plots out of state and communal property, it's 398 plots, and the total amount of the contracts was around 700 million hryvnias. Does anybody have anything to add? Okay, let's proceed to the next question then. My next question is about the second phase of the land reform that is about to start from the next year. I'm curious about the opinion of the panelists. Is it okay under conditions existing in Ukraine now? I mean, the market, the war and everything. Is it reasonable to implement this stage starting from January, or is it better to postpone it? Thank you. Well, thank you. It's a complex question and there is no one strict answer to it. We understand that the situation is complicated. In some areas the registers are not working due to the security situation, and some entities cannot sell or lease their land property. But on the flip side, we see that the limitations that are in place now, there are very little violators who would like to step over that limit of 100 hectares. Such cases, they exist, but it doesn't have a mass nature. There is information campaign in place. There is the state policy for raising investments. The investments is the blood of the state, the blood of the economy, and without access to the land resources, there will be no big investments in long-term projects. One of the elements for launching the land market was the limitation of the limitation of the long-term contracts, for example, the processing in agriculture, and on top of that there are cases of fraud, cases of raidership, and foreign investors, just as Ukrainian investors, did not want to invest in the long-term projects. There is a phenomena when the agricultural sector is the leader in the economy of Ukraine, because we harvest a lot of grain today, but the added value is not in harvesting, added value is in processing. This is why, in my opinion, we cannot postpone the second phase of the reform. The economy should continue operating. Let's also take into account the factor of dense mining, the mine contamination. For example, in Croatia, this story is going on for the last 20 years, and they are not even close to the solution so far. For the time being, the area which is contaminated with mines in Ukraine is 3 times bigger than Croatia itself, and now to cover for the losses that we were suffering within the last years, we have to cover them only by giving the investors the safety guarantees, the title, the property rights. Well, it's about the acquisition of the property title by the legal entities. Another thing is that the registration of the land plots should be over until year 25, or otherwise they will be transferred back to the state. The postponement of this aspect is still being considered, because we understand in certain regions people just cannot do this due to reasonable circumstances. It's not that they don't want. Thank you. Well, in continuation of the question, some people cannot exercise their rights to the land plots, and now that we've touched the problems of export, the problems with export will influence the price of our land, because people will be able to understand whether they can invest or buy something here. So we were talking about some results, some positive achievements, but talking about the challenges, what are the biggest challenges to overcome in the land market, and what do we need to do to overcome them? Well, the first challenge is the mining of the territories, the mine contamination. The areas contaminated with mines are not only Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson and Mykolaiv region. More than 10,000 hectares are mined in Kyiv region. There was some amount of land demined in Poltava, Cherkasy, Sumy region. And in some regions the price of the mining of the land plot is thrice bigger the price of that land plot. For example, in Kherson region, $1,100–1,200, this is the price of the mining of the hectare of land, while the nominal price of the plot would be $400. This is the challenge we have to overcome. This problem is being solved by the government. We created a state body for humanitarian demining, where the international aid is coming to overcome this problem. For example, a farmer who has 10 hectares of land which was incessantly shelled by the MLRS, for example, he would not be able to exercise his title for the land, and he would not be able to work on that land plot. Yet another challenge is the transition from growing of any, say, random corn to its processing. We see a number of companies, a number of businesses in Mykolaiv and Kherson region. We understand how bad was the vegetable market last year. We've seen Turkish tomatoes in our supermarkets. It shouldn't be something that would be happening this year, because the lands in the Kherson region are being demined quite actively, and also a part of the companies, they just moved to the western regions of Ukraine. But again, they need to find land, they need to build their greenhouses, they need to build some processing capacities to catch up with the seasonal changes. That's yet another challenge. And yet another challenge, the third one, is the lending by the banks. We understand how the war influences the loan portfolio of our farmers, because sometimes everything they could pledge as collateral, it all was left behind in the occupied territories. But thanks to the 579 lending program, we try to solve this issue. It's the most successful program for the time being, so we continue to work actively in this area, and hopefully this season will demonstrate how efficient is this support program by the government. Well, if you can mention any risks or challenges, if anybody has anything to add, what are the challenges, the risks for the land market that we have to overcome? Well, from my vantage point, I can add that we have to consider the land market as an investment tool, first of all, and respectively, to get more investors involved, to increase the demand by the buyers. We, as the administrator of the electronic auctions platform, we are ready to provide necessary instruments and to make some technical improvements. Just an example from our experience, Ukrainian experience of operation of the digital auctions, it was appraised by the World Bank, and in the end of the last year, the World Bank created quite a comprehensive review, and the main summary of it was that the fact of the land auction going from offline to electronic mode, it increases the price of sale almost 2.5 times. That creates additional interest by the foreign investor, that they understand that there are some some transparent ways of taking part in that auction, and the organizers, they understand that this is the way that they can get the maximum possible benefit from their property. If you have anything to add, please. I would like to add to the words that have been said already. First of all, we have to consider the land market not as a goal, not something that we want to sell, but we have to provide for the right of the citizens, for their free disposition of their property. We are democratic state, and we have to ensure the equal rights for all the investors, whether the acquisition of rights or acquisition of titles, and we can consider different improvements for operation of the land market. And it's worth starting doing so from the 1st January 24, when there will be more players added as illegal entities, because until the 1st of January they cannot enter into title to the lands which were under moratorium. So now there are quite strict limitations in the land market. But again, there will be a question arising whether the foreign capital should be admitted here, I mean the legal entities. But anyway, we will have legal capital there, but anyway the discussion will emerge, and we will we will need to be prepared to them. That will be yet another risk to overcome. Anybody has anything to add? Please take the microphone. Just in numbers, as we were selling the plots in years 21, 22, 13, 15 million hryvnias, that was the payment for the temporary use. Now the amount of contracts is more than 100 million hryvnias, and out of which more than 38 million hryvnias are already transferred to the local budgets. We track the price of fish in the market. It has not grown dramatically compared to other products, and the growth of prices during this period specifically is something reasonable. That's the annual growth. There is the fishing restriction in place, seasonal restriction in place, and only the legalized users of the bioresources may use it. So even regardless those restrictions, the prices for the fish, they do not fluctuate compared to the other products in the market. Well, if we don't have any more questions, well, there are questions. Yulia Krushenko, Suspilny, maybe not by the plan, but I will ask the question not about the reform or something, but still my question is, to what extent is the matter of land taxes is under control? I'm asking because we were asked by the residents of Ukrainka in Kyiv region what will be the tax, and the local deputies, they increased that local tax, so people have to pay from 6 to 9,000 hryvnias tax per one land plot. Thank you. The draft is already signed by the president, where there are tax exemptions for the land plots which are added to the register. So there are tax exemptions in place. If those are state or communal lands, then the lease is tax exempt. Talking about other territories that are not listed on that list, the tax code allows the local governments, well, they allow that bracket from 0.1 to 3%, they can impose that tax. So it's only the matter of replenishment of local budgets, and it only can be solved on the level of the community. There can be no centralized resolution. But let's be honest, we have to fight for something. This is something of everyone's concern. If we lost 25% of the harvesting areas due to occupation, the economy stopped working, the industry stopped working, so we have to raise taxes at least somewhere. And calculating the difference, if we increase the land tax, for example, the evaluation of hectare in Kyiv region is about 20,000 hryvnias per hectare, so the maximum annual tax can be 600 hryvnias. If it used to be 400 before, now it will be 600. I think I'm talking not as a government official now, but as just a regular person. I think that it's not a crazy amount of money which someone is capable of paying, and I think it's the matter of political responsibility of local governments and their relations with the community. More questions. Yelotko Yaroslav, Samostino, Ukraine. I have a question to Mr. Denis. So what is the global purpose of the land reform? Because there are measures taken, but the focus is more on how to better sell it. But what's the state policy? There are more challenges. You know that people were going away from rural areas in Kyiv, but now that we will be restoring Donbass, agriculture will be a key sector, something that will assist in the restoration of Ukraine. But if we take, for example, Argentina model, we will have what we have now, the domination of holdings who will bring the material, they will harvest the monoculture, the rural areas, the people. They will be, now they're occupied by Russians, and now then they will be disturbed by the economic factors. Well, it's quite an interesting question. We were analyzing it quite like yesterday, for example. Was the similarity between us and Argentina, and since year 21 we had trends in different cultures, crops, and we are a little bit ahead of Argentina now, which says that we do not support the Argentinian model with the big players. We only give this land to the people who want to get involved in agriculture. Another factor is the limitation of land plots up to 20 hectares. Before there were bids of 800, 600 hectares, and we understand that the farmers, the individual farmers, they cannot afford it, I mean, in principle. So now the term of lease is under 7 years. If there are many years plants planted in that land plot, they would be able to extend their title. And then there was the program of state exemptions in place up to 100 hectares or up to 100 cows. So the conditions are created to have this layer of farmers created who would provide the products for the internal market. So we try to create these conditions. Let's be honest, the agrarian holdings, they will not go anywhere, but their structure will be changing. Since the beginning of the war, one of the top 3 agrarian holdings who has I mean in top 3 by the land bank, they lost, for what I've seen, they've lost about 38,000 hectares. So they refused to rent that amount of land. So where those 38 hectares are gone? They were redistributed by the new contracts between the companies who can process more than 1,500 hectares. For Ukraine, it's not an average farmer, it's a small farmer. But 15% of those lands were distributed among the farmers, like 15-30 hectares. There were farmer startups that they want to try themselves. In a year they can wrap up their projects, but they exist, and it's a good dynamic because such thing never existed before. That there were agrarian holdings, and that was somebody who was renting the land. Well, in support of my colleague, the operation of the land market in the temporarily occupied territories, it will pose another social, economic and security risk. Well, if we have no more questions, let's wrap up. I appreciate the participation of every panelist who told us how the land market operates during the war, but see you shortly.